This panel is about transversal issues, and we have an excellent group today. We have here Diego Golombek, that will present the Time Use Initiative, which rethinks how we value and recognize time with powerful implications for policy. We have César Buenadicha from the Inter-American Development Bank that will discuss how institutions can innovate to support the silver economy and address the needs of the aging population. And we have Keita Nishiyama that will share the Japan's vision on Society 5.0, integrating physical and digital systems to build a more inclusive human-centered future. And I am your moderator. My name is Ana Maria Tribin. I'm from the World Bank. I work in women, business, and the law, where we identify the legal and policy barriers that prevent women to fully participating as innovators and drivers of the economy. So before we dive into their panel, I want to start with a reflection about the topic. So innovation cannot be taught outside the society. It has to be rooted in our realities, embedded in our needs, and used as a generator of well-being. We still live in a world with pressing inequalities in access, in opportunity, and recognition. And innovation can go both ways. It can be a very powerful tool to close the gaps, or it can widen them. So that is why innovation must be more than a novelty. Innovation needs a purpose. It needs a mission to improve life, to serve humankind, and advance dignity and inclusion. And that is what we are going to talk today. We are going to talk about all these transversal issues that are key for our well-being. Challenges that don't sit in one policy area or one institution. Issues like time, care, gender, and demographic change. These are deeply interconnected and affect all our life. We call them transversal because they touch everything, and they require more than the traditional governance. They require innovation, grounded, responsive, and cross-sectoral. So today we'll explore innovation in institutions, programs, laws, and policies that can help us to respond to the pressures, not in isolation, but in a comprehensive way that is cross-sectional, cross-systems, and cross-communities. So what we are going to do today is to have opening remarks from Diego, César, and Keita, who will each speak about an institutional innovation that is tied to a transversal challenge: time, cyberspace, and demographics. And after that, I will briefly change my role from moderator to speaker, and I'm going to talk about women economic empowerment, also a transversal issue. And then we are going to have a common question. And then we want to open the floor for you, the audience, to have an interactive Q&A in which I really want you to participate and allow us to have a very dynamic Q&A. So let's start. I want to invite Diego to share his reflections on the Time Use Initiative.
Thank you. The clock is not on.
Okay. The clock is not on. If you can help us with that.
Talking about time, you know. so we have a problem with time. Actually, I have a problem with time because I traveled 10 time zones to be here, so don't expect much about me this morning. But we tend to think about ourselves in space. We think about our bodies, our lives, our cities in space, but we live in time. This went off. We live in time and we are living clocks. That's what I research in my lab, chronobiology, living clocks, the clock that we all have in our brains. In a way, we are prepared for a world that doesn't exist anymore. a world that has very definite days and nights, in which we can predict seasonal changes, a world without cell phones, without screens, without daylight saving time. Many years ago, somebody called Thomas Edison claimed that he had invented electric light to fight against the tyranny of sleep. And he's winning, actually. More recently, the CEO of Netflix was asked, who is his principal competitor? People were thinking, well, he'll say other platforms, I don't know, Amazon, Apple, whatever. No, he said, my main competitor is sleep. And again, he is winning. But time is not only a biological concept, which I study in my lab. Time is a political concept. The way time is organized reflects the society that we live in. For example, in the 19th century, the main challenges were social reform and campaigns for 8 hours a day for work. In the 20th century, the movement for paid holidays, parental leave, and now in the 21st century, the right to time. Yes, the right to time. Are you aware that in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, there is an article about the right to time? It's Article 24, and I read it so I don't get it wrong. Everyone has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitation of working hours and periodic holidays with pay. Again, everyone has the right to time, but now we have recognized that time is not distributed equally. This is called time poverty. I'm not sure if you have heard the notion before. It's relatively recent. Citizens and us, we have the continuous feeling that we don't have enough time. That is time poverty. And it's not the same for everybody. It's estimated that it affects about 30 and 50% of the population, and maybe much more. For certainly in my region in Latin America, it's much more than that. Time poverty exists in all countries and regions with specific socioeconomic and gender disparities. Now, wait a minute, wasn't the UNDP created 60 years ago to deal with poverty problems? Then isn't it about time that they include time poverty as one of their issues, maybe in the accelerator labs? So talking about time poverty, what kind of innovations we can talk about? First, to recognize this right to time. People don't know about it. Institutions don't know about the right to time. Individual and collective rights to self-determine how we use our time. And I have a suggestion here. There is a declaration by the Time Use Initiative, the Barcelona Declaration on Time Policies, that I urge you to take a look, and maybe you can join us there, and it can be used as a framework here. Second innovation here, implement specific time policies. We can consider time as a key factor when we design public policies, and more about that later. Third, include time in your institutional organization, being a school, being a UN office, being a city, being a nation. Work as a network. We have discovered, and the Time Use Initiative in particular, is that the only way of looking at time as a transversal issue, specifically in municipal and city policies. And learn more. My job as a scientist, as a neuroscientist, is to tell people what happens with time and with sleep. Talking about that, another concept, my second concept this morning. Imagine there was a treatment that could improve your mood, consolidate learning and memory, boost your immune and cardiovascular system, slow cognitive decay, make you lose weight, and no, it does not make your hair grow, but I'm working on that, I'm sure. We have that treatment. That treatment is called sleep. And we naturalize that we have a problem with sleep, not only with time. Doing sleep service is the easiest job in the world. You ask people how they sleep, and they say, bad. If I ask you, I'm sure that 80% of you have not slept as much as you wanted. And we think that is natural, and it is not natural. We suffer a structural sleep deprivation in the world. In our societies, sleep deprivation is an epidemic that leads to health issues, productivity losses, an increase in accidents, and estimated economic losses of between 1% and 3% of the GDP. I calculated what it was for Argentina, for my country, and sleep losses amount to 1.3% of the GDP. That's a lot of money, just because we don't sleep very well. So the insomnia or the bad sleep pandemic is everywhere in our beds and in societies, and I also have some innovation proposals here. This has to do with something that we like to call the circadian city or the chronocity, a city in time, not only in space. And there are specific public policies for the circadian city. First, what time is it? It seems a simple question, it's not. What time zone are you? Time zones are political, they're not geographical, and they are wrong. Also, do we want DST? Do we want daylight saving time? Or should we stick with standard time? Well, we have evidence for standard time, but we are not good at communicating this. So that's really an issue that we have to face. B, another innovation for the circadian city, light at night. We have a light pollution problem. We have lots of light. If you're in the hotel and you look at the street and you see light coming towards you, that's wrong. Light is supposed to go downwards to the streets, to the cars, not to your eye level. And that affects sleep and it affects the ecosystem. It's very easy to reduce it, but we are not taking the necessary steps. Third, the circadian hospital. There's a lot to do regarding time in healthcare systems. For example, at what time do we take medications? And what happens in the intensive care unit? I know if you were ever been at an ICU, it's never day or night. If you only turn the lights off at night in the ICU, people get discharged 20% faster than if you don't. It's an easy policy, right? Turning lights off, but it pays off, really. Fourth, school timing. We are all wrong regarding school timing, specifically for teenagers. High school starts between 7 and at the most 8 a.m. And I guess you remember when you were adolescents and you had to wake up at 5 or 6 when it was dark out there, and you were asleep, and you were right to be asleep, because teenagers are night owls. It's natural for them to get late at night awake, and then they cannot wake up. It's a very easy policy to work on. And finally, working across the clock. What kind of public policies can we do for shift work, for night work, for extended working hours? I guess you'll remember Star Trek, the series. Do you remember that? Space, the final frontier. It was wrong. Time is the final frontier. And we, as a society, need to conquer it. Thank you.
Well, Diego, thank you very much for this. It's super important to think about time and sleep as a valuable thing that we all need and is always overlooked by policy. So let's go with César, that he's going to speak about the silver economy.
Thank you, Anna, and I think it's wonderful to hear from Diego, no? Because I think one of the reasons we are talking about demographic changes is because people don't have time to have babies, no? Probably, no? Or not. We can discuss about that. Thank you, it's an honor to be here. I work at the Inter-American Development Bank in Laboratory of Innovation. So first of all, I want to recognize all of you who are here working in supporting innovations in big institutions, because it's hard, it's not easy, takes time, it's very frustrating. So first of all my empathy and my support to all of you, because it's not easy to transform institutions through innovation, and you need to be, very determined and to be among your peers. So we are peers here trying to work for this transformation. Today I'm going to talk about 3 things. The first one is I'm going to give you a little framework of how I see institutional change and transformation. The second thing is I'm going to talk about demographic transitions in developing countries. And the third thing I'm going to talk about is about silver economy and a couple of examples. The framework I'm going to provide you about institutional transformation is very simple. Institutions are designed in a very simple way. Form follows function. So 100 years ago, you needed a need for health. So you develop, functions of healthcare, and you provide it with a form, with hospitals and the Ministry of Health of the country. No? Simple, no? And it was very efficient. Or you have education, schools, the Ministry of Education, no? Form following functions. And that operates well until 2 things happen. The first one is when new solutions emerge, because traditional institutions work with traditional solutions, health, hospitals. What happens when you have health tech innovations, when you have telehealth? Institutions are stretched because you have your traditional function, your traditional form, the money, the budget allocated to this, and then you need to stretch to use these kind of new innovations? How do you pay for telehealth? How do you support these kind of new innovations? How do you adopt them? How do you change your system? It's hard. But the second most interesting way the institutions evolve is when there are not traditional problems, is when you have new problems, which I love. Let's say climate change. Climate change is a new problem. Didn't exist 50 years ago or 100 years ago maybe. And then you need the institutions to start working in this new problem. But there is no institution that has the mandate initially to work on climate change. So you have different options. You could split the responsibilities among different institutions. You could develop a new institution. You can make institutions work together. But this is really hard and really complex. And I think this is the beauty of it. This is why we are all here, because designing institutions in new frontier problems is really important and is really fun, no? Because you don't fight against the past, you are designing the future, no? And this leads me to the second point I want to make, which is demographic transitions. And the way I explain demographic transitions is like an iceberg, no? You see the top part of the iceberg and the underwater part of the iceberg, okay? What do you see in the iceberg? We all see that demographic transitions are happening in developed economies, Japan, in South Korea, in Europe, in North America, no? We all see that. And we all know that the demographic transitions have a huge impact in health, in care economy, in pensions, no? People are really worried about pensions, no? This is everything we see which is above the water, no? But I'm gonna talk to you about what is underneath the water, no? And underneath the water is a much more complex situation in which demographic transitions are happening really rapidly in developing countries. The birth rate in Bogota is lower than in Tokyo. By 2050, 80% of adults aged 60 and above are going to be living in developing countries, okay? Right now in Latin America, where I work, almost every single country is below replacement rate, below 2.1. And 6 countries are already losing population. I'm talking about Latin America. So the problem is that on top of the iceberg, you have countries that became rich and then they become old. Below the iceberg, you have countries that are becoming old before becoming rich. And that has really huge implications. The first one is, let me tell you, economically. GDP. I come from a bank. Sorry, I have this banker also mindset. No? And GDP is very easy. GDP is you have the number of workers and the productivity per worker. So you have 100 workers producing 1 unit, you have 100 GDP. If you have 102 workers producing 1 unit of GDP, you have 102. This is good because you are growing the population, no? But the only way to grow GDP is either growing population or growing productivity. What happens in developing countries, we were used to having a population growth. So if we did nothing in terms of productivity, the GDP was growing every year, magically. We didn't do anything, but more people, even we export people, and the GDP kept growing a little bit, but kept growing. Productivity was not important. What happens when you start losing people? You know, if you don't do anything, your GDP goes down, which is huge. It's enormous. It has very, very important implications for all of. I always tell the story about Japan, no? Japan and the US, 1990 versus 2020. In those 30 years, Japan grew the GDP 0.4, the US 2.4 on average. Productivity in Japan grew 1.3, productivity in the US grew 1.4, meaning Japan did great job. But despite they did a great job in productivity, demographics are so important that it drags the country down. So what is going to happen with developing countries that are facing this very fast? And last in this topic, there are 3 main issues here. The first one is migration. I'm from Spain. How do we deal with population problems in Spain? Bring immigrants, you know? Everyone is welcome. Great. And that helps us with the pension. And then we have a sustainable pension system because we bring immigrants, no? But those immigrants are coming from places that they are going to need population as well. Right now, what I was saying about Colombia, Colombia is going to face very strong population challenges. What is going to happen with the pension system in Colombia if Colombians go to work in Spain? The second thing is about the fiscal capacities. What happens if you are not rich and you become old? Who is going to pay for that? How are we going to finance the whole aging of population if economies are strained with a lot of debt? And the third thing is about institutional capacities. When I talk about this topic to governments, they say, yeah, I should worry about this, but I don't have health coverage in many parts of the countries. So why should I worry about aging of population? That is going to happen, much farther along the way, no? But you do need to worry because this is coming fast. This is coming much faster than we know. The third thing I want to talk is about some cases on silver economy. So this looks like a catastrophe, no? The iceberg, we are the boat, we're going to crash, no? But of course, every problem brings opportunities and solutions. And we call those solutions silver economy. Silver economy is how, as countries, we can adapt and we can benefit from the aging of population. One thing is about, right now, the consumption of people over 60 is the fourth economy in the world, and it's going to keep growing. So the only economy that is sure is going to grow in the world, if you want to invest, is the silver economy, the aging economy. Put your money where the economy is going to grow. The second thing is two examples that we're working. The first one is in Uruguay, and I love this because Uruguay, President Mujica, developed this university to bring technical training, vocational training to people in rural areas of Uruguay. And it was a great idea. You need rural areas, you bring education, technical, higher education to rural areas. The problem is they realized soon enough that, the graduates, the students were every year less and less students, which is horrible because then you are graduating less people and the local economies are going to go down. Then what did they do? They decided a two-pronged approach. The first one is try to make more students go to higher education, normal approach. Second one is to bring elderly people reskilling, going back to college, and this is critical. Elderly people, they need to go back to school. We need to go back to learn more things. We need to be productive for longer. We need to make our work span closer to our health span and closer to our life span. So everything needs to move a little bit more extended in time, which is a great opportunity for all of us. So this university, UTEC in Uruguay, developed these programs to support education of elderly people and bringing these people in their 50s to have this kind of reskilling, which I think is very much needed in many countries. The second example is from Mexico City. Mexico City realized that needed 1 million caregivers trained in the next 10 years. And then look at the systems, institutional transformation, and then they say, I cannot train 1 million caregivers in 10 years. This is impossible. My system doesn't allow it, and I don't. So they did something which was very smart and very brave. They hired a startup called AnaCare, and to support with the training and matchmaking of caregivers and caretakers. AnaCare is a startup we support, and what they did is they signed this contract to train up to 100,000 caregivers to start training the caregivers and matching them with families in Mexico that needed care. This is a way for governments to evolve as well, partnering with a startup, with companies, which I think is going to be critical. So let me finish by maybe giving you a couple of final ideas. The first one is the first memorandum on climate change was on the table of President Kennedy in 1961, okay? And then United Nations Environment Program, I think, was created in 1972, Wonderful. 50 years have passed, we are where we are right now, We are still struggling with climate change. I don't see any memorandum around demographic transitions in developing countries. I don't see people talking about this as urgent as it is. And my first message here is that we don't have time. Many countries in developing regions don't have more than 10 or 15 years before the demographic collapse is going to really drastically affect the economies and the societies a lot. And people are going to be facing, and governments are going to be facing very difficult decisions. And for this, innovation and institutional transformation needs to happen right now. For that, and this is my last message, this is a call maybe for action. The call for action is that we truly need a global development agenda on demographic transitions. And this is something that the United Nations can help to do. We need to put together all institutions, private sector, public sector, innovation, universities, everyone working together to solve this new challenge that humankind faces. So this global agenda on demographic transitions needs to happen soon, and I hope all of you can join this effort to develop this agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, César. Super interesting. All this story of training elders and take advantage of an elder population that can also be productive and help our societies. So let's go with Keita Nishiyama to share the Japan's vision of Society 5.0.
Thank you, Anna. As somebody coming from Japan, I'm certainly interested in the topic of demography and aging, but today my focus is on Society 5.0. This is a concept which Japanese government proposed, I think, 7 or 8 years ago, and there are two sort of key phrases. One is cyber-physical integration. Why that is important? Because in the age of internet, we created the word cyberspace. You all know cyberspace. But at that time, the cyberspace did not really touch this word, physical world or real world. But what is happening now is actually these two worlds, cyber world, cyberspace, and physical space are now intermeshed each other. So that's a new phenomenon, and particularly, of course, the usage of AI will certainly affect this further integration. And secondly, it relates to the thinking, our thinking on the governance. We perceive the future of society, hopefully, as more decentralized or autonomous society. Why is it possible? Because normally when we think of AI, artificial intelligence, we normally think them as a, monolithic big brother thing. But yeah, it can be, but we can be otherwise, because that's also relates to the concept of cyber-physical integration, because in our world, physical world, real world, you cannot control your environment 100%. So natural disaster like earthquake, the security brief is a good example. You cannot control your environment 100%. Therefore, you need to adapt to your own environment. And environment is different from place to place. It's an issue of here and now. So you cannot dictate somebody else to do something to optimize their issue, because the environment is different from one place to another. Therefore, the cyber-physical integration, I think, requires us to think in the mode of decentralization and autonomous governance. And of course, in order to move to that direction, we need something. That's, of course, institutional innovation. And I think there are 2 or 3 important points if we are to move toward in that direction. First thing is we need to change a kind of mode of governance from rule-based to process-based, what I call. Because if we are to adapt your environment, that has to be, you cannot specify how you have to adapt to your environment by rules, because again, it's different from here and there, and now and tomorrow. And therefore, the mode of governance should move from today's mode of rule-based governance to process-based governance. And process-based governance, of course, includes the issue of participation, because if you are to create a new process, you have to think of who are able to participate in that process. So this process-based thinking is closely related to inclusiveness and participation. So that's one large issue. The second issue is actually on my slide, and I think I'm not challenging what Diego discussed, but I think space is still important together with time. And why the space is important is because, after all, we now live in a complex world, and we need the methods or the means to address the issues of complexity. And I think the space is one of the key words. Think of the ChatGPT, which is one of the LLM model. How are they possible to communicate with us naturally? I think the key was coming from the, as some of you may know, the mechanism called transformer or attention mechanism. So I'm not going into any detail, but after all, these AI techniques enable AI to configure the language into space. They, in a way, trying to understand the closeness of the language, words, each other. Like if I use the word pasta, that come close to the word Italy, but not necessarily close to temple. You know, humans understand the closeness by hunch, but AI using the multidimensional space finally understands somehow the meaning, space of the meaning. And also, since I have to ask the permission of Diego because it's something to do with biology, but recent biologists talked about the language of organisms. And they think that the organisms are using space as their language. The typical example is a kind of gradient of chemical materials. One side is if it's dense, and once it's not, it represents some expression of space by which they can communicate. They means organisms can talk each other. And even if you think of the humans, we actually use spaces. The famous example is coming from development psychology, which tells us that actually the infants, babies, are understanding spaces or frames prior to they acquire the ability, a linguistic ability. They first acquire the space understanding by, you know, sandboxes or the blocks. And then they can link these understanding spaces to the particular language or the words or the sentences. So I'm not continuing this slides, but what I'm trying to say is space may be a concept which can be transversal between humans, AIs, and nature, particularly in the organisms, so that they can share some communication. And it also relates to the concept of well-being, because after all, well-being is the approach trying to grasp something complex, something multidimensional. Therefore, that has to be translated into something spatial. So I almost stop here, but finally, just another keyword. I like the word architecture, because I think the concept of architecture is trying to link between data, algorithm, and this space thing, and also the governance, how you govern these spaces between humans, AIs, and data. So I won't go into detail because I spent much time, so I may come back to the details in a later session. Thank you.
Thank you for this fascinating perspective that is telling us that it's not innovation by itself. It has to be connected with society and well-being. So now I'm to change my role, and I'm going to talk a bit about women economic empowerment and show you how we can innovate to unlock the potential of women in our societies. So let's have the slides, please. Thank you. I want you to picture this. What if I tell you there is a key to unlock the global growth and lift millions out of poverty and break down barriers everywhere? It sounds like a game changer, right? That key is equal opportunity for women. Today, the playing field is uneven for girls and women everywhere in the world. And at our current pace, the UN estimates that it will take 300 years for women everywhere to fully exercise their rights, leadership, and agency. Until then, women will continue to be denied 1/3 of the legal rights that men enjoy. They earn less for the same work. They are more exposed to violence at homes, at schools, workplaces, and public spaces. And they carry the burden of unpaid care work and domestic work. And this can sound like someone else's problems, but this affects all, men and women, because gender equality isn't just about justice. It unlocks the potential. It expands the pool of talent so we can have higher economic growth and more innovation, more people creating and having new ideas. According to the World Bank, closing the gender gap in employment could increase global GDP by 20%. So how we can speed the things up? It's not difficult. We can start by removing legal, policy, and institutional barriers for women that are holding them back. There are plenty of restrictions in all our legislations that prevents women to fully develop professionally. Because laws and rules, they don't just set rules. They shape what is possible. And what works for women works for society. That is where the World Bank Women, Business, and the Law projects come in. Women, Business, and the Law, WBL, collects data on laws, policies, government programs, and the availability of sex disaggregated data across countries for 190 countries. This allows us to see where the gaps exist, what needs to be created. Let me change. Can I change the slide? And this will give us the ability to innovate and to create, and not from scratch, looking at the examples of other countries. Reforming and implementing better laws, programs, and data systems based on evidence will give us the chance to innovate on things that works. When a country creates a solution, it becomes a model. When others adapt it, it becomes a movement. And this is not just theory, this is realities. I want to talk about 3 cases of real women. In Rwanda, for example, a teacher named Anatoly had to return to work just 6 weeks after giving birth or lose most of their salary. So she had to bring the baby to the school, and she was constantly checking the baby. Both were struggling. WBL data flagged this problem. And Rwanda was able to reform, and now it guarantees maternity leave by law. And this gives women the time to care, to recover, and to return to work with dignity. In Jordan, Elsa commuted to work through unsafe conditions and constant harassment. This was limiting her choices. Thanks to WBL evidence and the advocacy of grassroots organizations, the public transportation in Jordan was reformed, and there are programs where they create a safety features that allow women like Elsa to travel freely. In Azerbaijan, women were legally prohibited to work in 600 jobs. One of these to be a train driver was prohibited. WBL data flagged this problem, and those restrictions were removed. And at 26, Samira became the first Azerbaijan female train driver. So these are not just stories. These are reforms informed by evidence that change life and expands opportunities. When these women, like these three, fully participate, they bring their skills, their creativity, and their leadership. And this is how we can unlock innovation. So what we can do? We can go to our website. Let me see if I can change this for you to check the website. Can you change? Next one, next one. One more? This one. So go to our webpage. We have, for all the areas you can understand in each of your countries, where are the gaps, where are the barriers, and what other countries similars are doing. So with better laws and better data, we can have a better future. Gender equality is not just the right thing to do. It's a smart investment. When women rise, economies rise, and societies grow stronger. And innovation follows after this. So I invite you to go and check what is missing in your country and what you can do. Well, now I want to ask the same question for the whole panel. In your view, what is the most important institutional shift needed for business and the economy to truly recognize and support interconnected well-being, not just as a short-term goal, but as a lasting priority? Diego.
Thank you. I'll go with two, if I'm allowed, very fast. One is, I mentioned that we need to acknowledge time in institutions, countries, cities, or NGOs, whatever. We don't have an officer for time. We do have in some cities a time officer or a night officer. That should be universal. We could call that the CTO, the Chief Time Officer of an institution, where there are several cities that have them, and it works perfectly. So that's a really good innovation that I urge you to look into. The other one is, we always talk about data-based decisions, evidence-based policies, and for time, we need data. We have lots of surveys. I'm not that trustworthy of many of those surveys that are around, because for some issues they're okay, for some they're not. But the data is there. We have lots and lots of data. What Keita was talking about in the cyberspace, there's lots of data we can take advantage of. For example, we can take a look at how people use networks, social networks in time. That's a wealth of data, and we are using that to measure jet lag, social jet lag, sleep deprivation, and so forth. And the most universal one is get data from cell phone interactions. That's really universal. Unfortunately, everybody has cell phones. Most of the people have smartphones now, and we can get lots of time-derived data from there, and we can do policies with that, because that's universal. We can take a look at time poverty in different populations, in gender issues, in elderly issues, and the data is there. So I urge us to use the data to decide what kind of public policies we can do about time.
César?
Yes, Diego stole the data part, so I'm going to move to the next one. No, just I'm going to artificial intelligence now. No, just kidding. No, the first thing I think is relevant when we think about this issue is money, budgeting. When we think about what is happening right now in institutional transformation in the US, is because of money, because of budget. There is a huge world evolution around money and debt. Many countries have very high debt, and there is little funding for things that we believe are basic needs for everyone. So one critical transformation is, how are we going to understand and fund the priorities that we are going to be facing in the future? No? When I think about the aging of population, the way I put it is, I don't know if you remember An Inconvenient Truth, this documentary about climate change, no? It was an inconvenient truth, and aging of population is another inconvenient truth. The problem is that we don't have money for more inconvenient truths. There are truths, but I don't want to see it because I cannot fund the resources that are needed to solve this problem. And this is a huge situation all across the world. Institutional transformation has to be connected with funding. whatever we think, whatever we dream about how are we going to innovate, we need to have the money to make that happen. And this is a huge transformation because funding is tied to existing priorities, to existing organizations, to the UNDP, to the IDB, to all of us who are here. No? We are tied to specific funding, and we need to be open. If we really want to be true to the innovation of the future, we need to be open to new ideas about how the world is going to fund and to support and to finance the needs of the future. This is not easy, but again, look for the funding in all these kind of needs that are critical, no? And in this respect, we need to be super open to innovations that really are result-based. You know, we love innovation, we love experimentation, but more and more with artificial intelligence, with everything you want, you know very fast whether something is working or is not working. You don't need to do the typical theory of change. I test something, you know, I evaluate, I scale, I evaluate, I reevaluate, I do all these kind of circles. This is probably good, but in the world that we live, yesterday I was watching this derviche, you know, the dancing thing, and the guy who explained that to us says like, this is from another era, because people don't have 45 minutes to watch this music and to see these people dancing around. We are used to screen videos like this, no? So in development interventions, we are moving at a fast pace, and we really need to adapt, and we need to adapt both innovation, the funding for innovation, and how we measure everything. And so maybe my message here is that we need to look inside, we need to look at our own institutions, we need to look at how we can do better and how we can finance and fund better what we do.
Keita.
I already touched upon it in my presentation, but for me, the most important thing is move away from rule-based approach to process-based approach. But if we are to move on to the process-based approach, that has to be supplemented by several institutional innovation. Process-based approach means that you leave the relevant parties to decide their own process. Because otherwise, if centralized body specify the processes, that will give a normally move on to the situation of what we call procedure fetish. You have many, many procedures to satisfy, and that will lead to, you know, deprivation of time. So we have to leave the process, the decision of process making to the individual parties, but that has to be supplemented by kind of participation. And so we are moving away from sort of centralized participation to more decentralized participation, because the past participation normally means that you can vote to select the leaders or the representatives. And also we thought of the balance of power at the center. But in the future, because the process are left with the relevant parties, you have to think of the participation of bottom-up or decentralized level, and also the check and balance at the decentralized level. That's the first category. The second thing is what I call the institutional innovation is what I call digital audit. Because in the past, what was important at the business level is if we have a transaction with somebody else whom I don't know very well, is a financial, you know, stability. So that's why we created the system like accounting and financial audit, so that you can be sure that the other party is at least financially stable tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. But now we are dealing with data and algorithms. We have to be sure whether the other parties are capable of dealing with data in a good manner. And of course, principally, it has to be left with that party, but you have to be sure that that party actually live up with what they promised. So we need the third party to assure that they are doing what they promised to do. And that gives me idea of kind of digital audit. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to add to this thinking about women and economic empowerment. And there are two topics that I found in the data that are long-hanging fruit of things that we can do in several countries to permit women to participate in the economy. So about sexual harassment, 151 countries have legislation that prohibits sexual harassment at work. That is great. But only 39 prohibit sexual harassment in public spaces. And if we look at the data, 1 out of 6 women report not to work and not to seek a job because they fear the public spaces like transportation. So this is a very low-hanging fruit to just see what others are doing and regulate the public spaces for allow women just to go from home to their jobs. The other one is about childcare. A lot of countries are investing in systems of childcare that is great because we know that women around the world are doing 3 more hours than men in care and domestic work. That's a lot of time. So they cannot fully participate in the economy. But what happened? Only 62 countries out of 190 have any regulation for quality standards for childcare. So if you have all this investment in childcare, that is infrastructure, teachers, caregivers, and you don't have quality, it is very probable that women are not going to use it, or families are not going to use it. So there is going to be an inefficient investment. So it's very easy just to go and regulate and see all the programs and policies that regulate the quality of the childcare. So these are the 2 main innovations that countries can copy from others for women to participate in the economy. Now I'm going to open this space for questions. So I really want you to participate, give your comments, give your questions to our panelists. Let's open the floor for the audience.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for this wonderful panel. It's been amazing since the morning, a great opening as well. So, I mean, I'm the guy who drew the rabbit when we drew the animals. And I basically, used the simple 62 principle, because that's the safest. And then the master of ceremony said, well, this is the one that looks really like an animal, and the other ones, well, we don't really know, So, and then it made me think, like that tendency for us to stick to the one that we know about, that we know that it used to work, that it worked in the past, and now things are horrible in the world. There are overlapping challenges, crises across the world. So why not going back to what used to work rather than innovating something new? So the backlash I'm talking about. And I wonder how we could convince the blockers of institutional innovation in such a world where, we see a growing fear, of course, also the change, and then we also see that this backlash started to work, because you were mentioning the women's rights, but we also see the banning of using gender as word in many countries. We also see women, women, rather than women's empowerment or women's equal space in the workforce. There is also this discussion towards women being home and men working outside as a solution to what we are experiencing as challenge. So how to challenge this? How to challenge the blockers? Maybe that would be a question based on your field of expertise. Thank you.
Am I on? Yeah. First of all, congratulations for your rabbit. It was very nice. I understand what you mean, and I want to tell you about an example, a research example. We are studying native communities in the north of Argentina that had no access to electricity, because it was a wonderful opportunity to see how time and sleep were like. And then they got electricity. And in 10 years, electric light, in 10 years, they lost 1 hour of sleep, which is a lot. right? So then what should we say? Should we say, okay, then electric light is not good? Not at all. We cannot go back to those times. It's useless. What we need to do is to educate people for a rational use of technology, in my case, for sleep and circadian rhythms. So that's the challenge, to make sure that we don't have to go back. We have to use technological innovations and adaptations for a better quality of life. It's a huge challenge, I understand, but I don't agree with the going back to those were the days. These are the days, and we have to use those technological adaptations for our own good sake.
Yeah, of course I disagree with Diego.
Of course.
No, because it's easy. No, maybe I heard this phrase that I like history that does not repeat itself. Humankind, we do repeat ourselves, no? And I think that is a nice, idea, because some of the problems that we are facing today, they're unique. The whole idea of, I'm very passionate about demographic transitions, because never in the history of the world, never, there's been like this decline in fertility rate, or like people living longer. This is kind of new, or climate change, never happened before. We cannot learn from the past because there was no past. There was no moment like, the Black Plague, whatever, but this really random, no? But humankind, we do repeat. We tend to have these patterns of, stupidity and, nonsense and fear, all the things that really, our silos, no? And how we think of our family, and then we think about all the people, all these patterns of humans, I think are very relevant to really deal with innovation, no? Because at the end, innovation happens in human bodies, no? And human bodies are a form of people, no? So every one of us who work here probably know that the best way to innovate is to know someone who can help you, no? Within the organization. Someone who is risk taker, someone who is in the right level, who is willing to do whatever. The best part of me as innovator is being a lawyer, and I always say that any innovation at the end of the day needs someone to sign a paper, okay? So whatever you do, at the end of the innovation is gonna be someone signing something. So we need to really picture that, you need to help that person to sign something, and that's a human being with their, maybe a politician, even worse, or maybe even better, I don't know. But we need to see that institutional transformation is about taking into account people that do things in a way that they've served them really well in the past, and you need to change the incentives, and you need to make them feel comfortable to do this. Just an example, we did this pay for result program in Colombia, no, which was great, no? And instead of paying for person trained, we pay for employment, that the person got after, and we pay 6 months after, no? The problem is that the public official who was supposed to sign the contract was signing something that nobody did before, was signing a contract to pay for outcomes, not to pay for outputs, no? This was crazy. How do you make that person sign that contract, no? How do you transform the mentality of a public servant with incentives that go every 40 years, if they're lucky, to long-term viability of these things? It's complicated, but you do find the right people, and you do find the right incentives if you make, the whole data approach good for these kind of challenges, no? So, I'm optimistic, but again, let's picture that innovation at the end is about human behavior, because history is always innovating itself in ways that we need to adapt.
Yet,
I was born in 1963, and in Japanese zodiac, it's a year of rabbit, so I love rabbit. That's the first thing to say. But in my opinion, the important thing is how we will be able to acquire inspiration of institutional change. So for that matter, I think it may be useful to think what happened in the past, but it's not necessarily a revival of what we did before. For me, it's only the past can give you a kind of inspiration, and it doesn't have to be in your own history, but somebody else's history may give you some hint of future institution. And second thing is why I am now interested very much in the digital technology or AI, is that after all, yes, people try to stick to the traditional existing institutions, but something like AI, when it comes, you need to do something, even if you don't like it, because it's a new creature. It's not it didn't exist before. Therefore, I think the technology also somehow gives you the necessity and also the inspiration how you have to think of the different kind of or innovative kind of institution. So that's my thinking. Thank you.
Finally, I want to address what you said about gender equality. I'm an economist, so I wanted to make the point, the economic point for equal opportunities. Like men and women are complements in the economy rather than substitutes. We can, if we allow all the people to have equal opportunities, we can have more ideas, more innovation, we can have better opportunities for everyone. There's a very interesting paper in which they put couples to make different tasks. One was cooking and other was something manual, like, I don't know, fix a car. And they started to see who was productive in these two, men and women. And not always was the woman the best at cooking and men the best at fixing the car. But they started to see, even when they release the information about who was the more productive, they stick with these activities. And that was not efficient. So the idea is to allow our economies for everyone to discover their potential and their skills and be able to develop them. There's another question.
Thank you. Jessica Seddon from the Institutional Architecture Lab. I'm completely sold on the importance of transversal issues and also the need to advance solutions, and some of the starting points that you identified about, finding the money, finding the person to sign, figuring out how to make them comfortable. But I want to pick up on Keita's point about inspirations. What I would really love to hear from the panel are specific examples of institutional innovations in 3 areas. One, how do you make the transversality more visible and unignorable? So beyond producing the data, making it absolutely unignorable and politically salient. Creating new organizations that can coordinate interventions to enhance sleep or work across the various sectors of the economy to enhance opportunities and equalities of opportunities. Or if you can't do a new organization, starting points for processes or routines for connecting some of the dots. So making things visible and unignorable, connecting some of the dots, creating new organizations. What are precedents from our time or examples of innovations that we can learn from now? Thank you.
Do you want to go?
Yeah. Thank you. I think I use the terminology of architecture, and architecture is, if I specify the structure of architecture, it's a layered structure. It's not a silos. So I think the first thing we can establish something which is visible and easy to understand way of changing the institution is making, maybe exaggeration, almost everything into layered approach. And I'm not going into detail, but I'm intrigued by the idea of digital public infrastructure like India Stack, because they're all across the ministry, across the department. It's a layered structure. And it's quite visible, because if you write the diagram of DPI, it's layered structure. It's not a Minister of Finance, Minister of Foreign Affairs like that. And also, if I may touch on slightly different way of saying is that the reason I use the term space is that we can learn many things from actually biology. because I think we are trying to address something complex and also evolutionary. And I think there are many hints we can acquire from the what actually organisms are doing without speaking. So I think that I'm not a specialist, but the biology or the biological or ecological understanding can provide us the image of future of institution. So that stops here.
Okay, yes, thank you. So it's a complicated question. Maybe I would say two things. The first one is we need to be surfers, you know, so there are waves. And we need to see the waves of transformation coming, no? I always say that the most important thing when you work in an institution is, you know, to swim with the river, with the current, not against the current, because the current in these institutions is very strong. You're going to drown. You're going to not do anything. So we need to be patient. Some person told me that in these institutions, 80% of the time is waiting, 20% of the time is acting, no? So you need to be like a surfer, no? Like, wait, not this wave, the next one, no? And really have a clear agenda, because when you see the wave, the perfect wave of transformation, you need to jump in, align people, align incentives, and use the wave really to reach farther, no? Into the shore. So this kind of wave analysis and understanding how innovation, what I said before, no? History, societies, they change. They change. So we don't have to shake up things. Things are shaking by themselves, you know what I mean? Generative AI, everything is shaking right now. So sometimes we don't need to keep, you know, pushing things more and moving things, you know. I always have this metaphor on the ball in the basin, no? So stability is like a ball that is moving in a basin, no? And it goes like this, no? And sometimes, because of things, the ball moves faster, no? In the basin, really fast. This is what is happening right now. And sometimes the basin, you know, collapses, and you jump to the next basin, no? And this is what happens in society, no? So you don't need to focus on moving the ball that much, but really on understanding how is the basin and how we can structure those interventions, no? So we make the stability work in our favor. And what are the borders of the stability? How we can, for instance, in silver economy, what I did in the bank, when you do an innovation in an institution, worst thing ever, task group or group force, you know, whatever, a group working on that, and a strategy. Then you kill the innovation, no? So first thing, try to avoid any kind of word around a strategy, who leads what, then you are killing these things, no? So everything under the radar, working together, no? Until you have the alignment of people, the alignment of incentives, no? So you move to the new reality. Be patient, wait for the wave to move, no? The second thing in terms of your question, which is much more personal, I think when you work in institutional transformation, I always think like biology, like this is like cholesterol, no? You have good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. And in institutional transformation, you have skepticism, no? You have good skepticism, which is the skepticism that you believe, no, this is not going to work, I've seen this before, no, because of data, and you end up being this kind of skeptical expert, no? In saying like things don't work. This is the good one. The bad one is when you believe that, no, this is not going to happen, we cannot change this, institutions, you know, they are too strong, the foundations, the layers, the silos, the building is too big, it's not going to change. That skepticism is very bad. So we need to really build on our good skepticism, like the good cholesterol, and try to reduce our bad skepticism, the bad cholesterol.
Thanks a lot for the question. Now, first, a short comment about what Keita was saying. I believe that the installation that we just saw is exactly that. It's looking at biology as inspiration for institutions, and that gives us a lot to work with as biologists, so I thank you for that. And regarding the question in particular, first, how to make things visible. Of course, it's a matter of communication, of good communication. I work in science communication, and it's not very easy. And in our field, it is relatively easy because people are kind of conscious about time constraints, about sleep problems and whatever. You just have to find the right examples. Let's say, did you guys know that having enough sleep is about the same as being drunk? So if we have designated drinkers, we need designated sleepers. So I'm using that as an example of a very good issue of communication that people will relate to. And then they will think about their timing or sleep or whatever. Sleep as health issues, time poverty as economic issues are very good communication standpoints to start with. Actually, I believe this is the very first time that the UNDP puts time as a transversal issue. That's a great start in terms of communication. So visibility has to do with that, with choosing the right examples that people will really relate to. And regarding the second part of the question about institutions, I mentioned that very briefly, this idea of somebody or an office or a person or whatever being in charge of time-related policies in an institution. Because if it's a transversal issue and we leave it to all the offices that might have to do with it, then nothing will happen. Having this fancy called chief time officer, which is quite cool. What do you work? Well, I'm a chief time officer, isn't that good? I mean, it really works because it tells the institution that time is part of your DNA. So my 2 cents here are communication. For example, we have time use weeks throughout the world, and we have time use capitals throughout the world, and that's a very good, strong point for communication. And the other one is to make sure that in your institution, there is an office or a person that is thinking about how to embed time in your policies.
Hello? Sorry. You talk a lot about, let's say, the effects and importance of the different topics that you were, right? But I would like to know about strategies or tactics that you see that has worked, right? So, for instance, Diego is working with several cities around the world on how to introduce time policies. You just mentioned these time officers, etc., that are part of this architecture of transversal issues, right? César is working on the silver economy and the demographic challenges, right? This includes private sector, but also public sector, includes silos within governments, not just the Ministry of Social Affairs, but also I found very interesting that the ministries of economy are really, really interested on that, so maybe you go work on that. And Mr. Keita, on all your work when you were a public officer, you work with many different parts of the government in order to create not only economic development and investment, but also new programs. So I would like to know from you which tactics or what governments, because we have representatives of government and cities, can use when these topics that are super important but doesn't fit in any box can be dealt with. And what is the opportunity also in having topics such as heat, time, and others that, as they don't have a clear ownership, can enhance collaboration. So I don't know if you can delve on that. Thank you.
Diego.
Yeah, I think that the last thing you said, Ron, is the key, that they need to have clear ownership in terms of time policies. Who is in charge of that? Is that part of a political discourse? Is that part of an institutional agreement between parties? It's happening, but it's slow. And I understand why, because we didn't know this before. We didn't know that sleep is needed for productivity or for health, or that time is unequally distributed in gender, in the population, and so forth. Now that we know it, we need ownership. We need, and that's. I urge people that are decision makers here in the room to think about who owns the possibility of proposing this type of policies and implementing them. Of course, that has to do with budget, which César was talking about, and I know nothing about budgeting, so don't look. I'm a scientist, you know. We really don't know about budgets, but we do know about. How to use all the evidence that we have drawn in the last 10 years, not more than that, not more than 10 years. And that's why I'm here. I'm a research scientist, but I want my science to be translated into real policies. So we need this kind of interactions and partnerships with policymakers. We provide the data, we provide the research, but we need to talk about this, and somebody has to take the responsibility for owning the issue.
Yes, so it's a complex question. Maybe my best answer a colleague gave me, we need to be good bureaucrats. Being a good bureaucrat is very difficult, no? And being a good bureaucrat means that you understand what can be done, what cannot be done, and what is your job in the whole structure in the first place. Because the problem with bureaucrats is that we have power, and how we use power is complex. The biggest complexity is how bureaucracy uses power, no? Many of the things. So one of the things that I would recommend people is to think, tactical and strategy. What I said about the iceberg of aging, no? Tactical work is about the care economy, of course. Care economy, pensions, health. Everybody sees this, everybody understands that, and this is the only thing you can start working in an emerging topic. This is the only way, like something concrete, no? Because if you say, underneath the water, there are so many things, people cannot follow you. But then you need to find champions that see the whole picture. This is the only way. The Ministries of Finance, or people from the companies. People from the companies, they see this. They see the aging of population a lot. When you talk to a Ministry of Finance, they look at you and they say, I know what you're thinking, no? I know what is gonna happen in my country, no? One thing I didn't say about aging, which I love, I'm gonna say it, is the rule of 1, 9, 18, no? Which is very critical, because you say, aging, yeah, societies are aging, so what? We have time. No, we don't have time, because climate change, let's say you want to improve pollution in Istanbul. You stop the cars, then the day after it will be a little bit better, 2 days better, a month later better, no? It's pretty much short-term, some things, not others, no? The CO2. In aging, it's very complicated. You want to improve birth rates. Everybody has children one day. One day you start solving the problem. In 9 months, you have new babies, 9 months after. But only until 18 years, you have a new generation of workers. So in the best case scenario that of course is not gonna happen, you have 20 years of delay. So what politician, what entities can buy and are willing to bet on this long-term approach? Who are the people who are responsible for the problem that you're trying to sell? This is the most important thing, no? As innovators, we need to think who are the key audiences that are engaged in the problem that we want to sell. And in the case of aging, truly, it's the Ministries of Finance or the central bankers, because they are the ones who see the pension fund going down, the labor participation. So this is the people I found that were very relevant for me. But I invite every one of you to work tactical, with the people doing, but also strategically with the people who own the problem and who are going to be there, suffering the consequences of the problem if it's not be solved.
And they're getting older, the bankers.
Yes, and the bankers will also get older.
My short answer, I was in government for 35 years in civil service, and my tactics was always to create a new agency which has a specific objective across ministry, and invite private sector people there. Because if we are to try to do something within the current government, like interagency mechanism, that will end up with, you will just forget. But if you create a new agency, I think we can create a new organizational culture there, and we can recruit people who are really willing to work for that particular purpose or particular agency. So that was my tactics I used several times here.
Very short to the same question. Very, very short. We usually work with shift workers. We advise shift workers and companies, and what we have to tell the workers is completely different to what we have to tell the owners of the factory, of course. For the workers, we have to tell them to increase to have better policies for shift work has health consequences, very important health consequences. Shift work increases cancer, for example. But for the factory owners, our tactic has to be completely different. They don't care usually about that. They care about productivity. And if you do design shift work properly, productivity increases a lot. So the tactic is how to talk to our different stakeholders. I
want to add to that. I also was part of the government in Colombia in 2018. I was the gender minister. And one of the things that helped to move the agenda in gender equality was data. So data and evidence is key to really show where are the problems. For example, in Colombia, they were thinking that informality was a problem mainly for women. And then looking at the data, men were more informal than women. So then you have to see where is the problem and how to solve it. So that is why I find this index that I'm working on very illustrative for countries to understand where are the problems and how to solve them. I know that now people are not that shy and you still have a lot of questions, so we can have the questions after the panel. We're running out of time. I want to invite our panelists to briefly give me based on what we talk here and your own story, what is the most pressing institutional innovation that we have to start right now in 2025? So I'm going to start from you, that you are always the last one.
Okay, thank you. I'm now in the private sector, so I may start from a kind of corporate governance principle because comply or explain. I'd like to try to switch the order, explain or comply, because it's closely related to process-based approach. So comply or explain means that you have to comply rules first, but if you really are not able to comply with the rules, you have to explain. I'd like to switch. I think that's easiest because you comply and explain already, so just change the order. May be a small things, but change the attitude towards the governance.
Yes, for me, the most important thing is that I don't think we are living in an insecure world. I think we are living in a world that is in transition. So transition is you leave one place, and probably you leave that place because of innovation, no? Because something happened. You get into a boat, and then after some time, in a journey, you will arrive to a new place. And in between, you're in a transition. So I think the most pressing and urgent thing for me is to design institutions for transition, okay, for transitions. And it's not for change, because change is what is going to happen in a while. And the past is what was before, no? And I think institutions are either thinking of the future, which is not there yet, or thinking of the past, where it was they were created. So I think designing institutions for transitions is probably the most urgent, thing that we can do right now.
Diego.
Actually, after listening to the panel, I'm much more convinced that time is a transversal issue. For example, Keita was talking about the environment, and of course, the relationship to the environment is a temporal relationship. That's the concept of the One Health idea by the UN. And César was talking about silver economy, and it has a lot to do with what do we do with time in different ages, also about demographics. It's true that part of the birth rate decrease has to do with not having time for having babies, or even worse, there's something called chronotype, which is that some people are very early larks, some people are very late owls. Sometimes a very early lark will marry a late owl, and in that case, if they have children, it's a miracle. They will never find each other in time. It's a joke, but it's not really a joke. And Anna was talking about gender inequalities, and actually time poverty hits much more women than men because of all the unpaid work and unpaid work hours that they have. So my institutional transformation after listening to the panel is very simple, which is what I've been saying from the start. Think about time in your own disciplines, in your own offices, in your own institutions. That will change a lot.
Well, I want to finish with a reflection. And one of the things that I have been learning from this panel is that our topics are interconnected. And sometimes we end up competing in our topics. And I think that they have to go together. I remember during the pandemic that the first topic was the care, like what we are going to do with the kids. So that was the topic that everyone was talking about. And then it was climate. No one was talking about care, then climate. So if we keep changing and jumping, we are not going to find a solution. We have to see all these interconnected as the society 5.0. And one of the things for innovation is, as one of the people of our audience was talking about, we don't have to start from scratch and always have something new. There can be things there that we can use and we can learn from. That is why I want you to check our data in laws to see what is there and what is missing in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.